No history.
Hi guys, thank you for joining. This is Hi guys, thank you for joining. This is Essence of History, and today we're talking about the Pope. I'm Amanda
And
Armagost.
I'm Dr. Abbasi for Essence. What a relevant podcast right now.
Yes, R.I.P. Pope Francis.
Well, what we understand as a pope. What you, what's your understanding of what who
So
pope
my
is?
understanding of the Pope is, of course, very basic. It's I guess how I understand it is
Mhm.
the leader of the Catholic Church. He kind of my understanding is he pretty much makes the calls for the church and speaks on behalf of the church as a group, and he lives in Rome in the Vatican.
Yeah, and his name means
Pope Francis,
well,
and he
father.
chooses father,
He
and they
just
choose their name, right? Like
yes.
once they become the pope, then they choose a name.
And that's the thing that they shed everything that was before. They are not a person anymore because they are the head of the state. That state is called Vatican,
Hmm.
and we can go back in time and talk about what the story of that used to be. But practically, they are a head of a state. As a matter of fact, Vatican is a state. Is the small one of the small state existing, but they have like embassies in almost every country. I think even they have embassies in North Korea.
Wasn't Pope Francis the first non-European pope, or like the first Latin pope?
I'm not sure about that because I'm sure there are lots of other, pope that were from Spain or other places and so on. I'm not sure if Latin include them or not, but to my best knowledge, one of the very, very, if any, few pope that wasn't from Europe,
Hmm.
Europe proper.
He's Argentinian,
Yes, he is.
or was, and
Yeah,
he was also one of the most um like future thinking
progressive.
progressive popes.
Yeah.
He was really big on like feeding the poor, and I know that I was reading some stories that he would dress up like not like the pope, like sneak out, and
Hmm.
he would not get in trouble, but like against the rules, sneak
Yeah.
out and go and feed the homeless, feed the poor all
and
around Rome.
and his history comes from the military dictatorship in Argentina. I'm I'm not I'm not sure if you are aware of that in South America, we in United States, we supported a lots of bad actors, and we helped lots of military dictatorship in um, Chile, Brazil, almost every single country there. And he grew up in a time that our military and political and economical power was endless, exerted in South America. Literally, we suppressed these nationalistic movements in all those countries, and we did it very easily. Every time we wanted to topple a government, if they didn't follow our interest, we declared them as communists, even though they weren't. They were mostly nationalistic. They were saying our money should stay in Argentina or in Chile, not go to New York and America.
Yeah.
But then we declared them as communist, and then we literally paid off some generals. We coordinated everything, so they did a military coup, and then we dictated their political environment. And he grew up in that time frame, and there's some good evidence that um see in the time that lots of people did fight this military dictatorship, is it's a good evidence that he tried to cooperate with them, meaning that not fighting against them.
Working together,
Well, I wouldn't say working together, but
finding a compromise.
finding a compromise. And that was really actually that hold against him, that you were cooperating with these killers, where in my opinion is he was actually trying to save as many lives as he could in that situation.
Yeah, that's how I would see it too. He's
Like,
not feeding into it, but he's trying to stop the problem from continuing.
yeah, he wanted, in my opinion, he wanted to stop to killing. And in his way, the way to stop the killing is not to not to fight the dictatorship. At least no, no, any kind of fight would have ended up in death and misery. And so, but that was held against him. Now, yes, he was one of the most progressive popes, and now we are going to go through a
Also,
process.
wasn't he the first pope to say, um, like he didn't say I'm for gay marriage, but he said I'm not. He said I'm against anti-gay marriage rules.
Now, well, let's put it that at least
He's he said something along the lines of it's not my position to choose to say
okay.
what God's going to say
Do
about
you
you.
know who was the pope before him? Uh, the Cardinal Ratzinger, a German, who became Pope Benedict, who was in Germany already known as the most conservative and, I mean,
Hmm.
conservatively radical pope. Before him, it was Pope Jean Paul, who was Polish. He was he started some um, progressive movement, very limited, very limited. And Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, reversed most of that. And I would say the Catholic Church, not Catholic religion, but Catholic Church, has been in a peculiar situation and in a state of disorganization for a long time. Number one, because they the whole earth is moving in one direction, the whole humanity is moving in this direction, and they just have been at least they have been holding back, and Pope Benedict actually reversed lots of progressive movement in that direction. And then there was a literally a disastrous situation. So what do we do? Are we going to be getting smaller and smaller? Because look at the young people, look at the humanity, it's moving one direction, and we are still holding to our way of life from 100 years ago. Can we really keep doing that?
Yeah.
And he, in his way, I think the Pope Francis, in his way, trying to open up the church to say, that's the way we are going to survive. We are with you. We are uh, part of this movement of humanity and so on. And it's not really much that he never literally said, "I'm okay with the gay marriage" and so on.
He just said I'm not against it.
That is the extent he could go.
Hmm.
You remember, this is the same person that 50 years before that, he didn't fight the killer's dictatorship. He tried to reduce the damage.
Yeah.
So he was pragmatic in his own way, but that's maybe the best he could do
Oh
with the
my gosh,
situation.
yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
Especially kind of like the way that things are going this like today today with religion. I think now religion was kind of like open, like becoming more like accepting, like I love you kind of thing, and now it's going back to being closed
Yeah,
in my
no,
perspective.
yeah. Well, I think religion is something that brings a lots of people together,
Totally.
but that part of that bringing together are the people.
Hmm.
And people, obviously, today are very different than people 50 years ago or even 30 years ago. Now,
Yeah, or even 10.
yeah, and there is obviously almost any religion or any ideology, any political things, to a certain point, they want to manage the way things are because that's known. If you start changing things, there are lots of unknown there, and certainly, understandably, they will struggle to make big changes. But the fact is, like, um, language, it changes, really, literally changes.
Hmm.
Now, imagine there are people who absolutely want to talk like people spoke 100 years ago, and you understand them, but it's just different. They are different. They're not keeping up with you. They are not. They've used words that you, and then it comes to misunderstanding, because if people just say, "I'm going to still talk the way it was spoken 100 years ago," and they're going to start telling words that is very offensive now. They
Oh my
weren't
gosh,
used to
yeah,
be. They weren't used to be offensive 100 years ago.
totally.
and even if they were offensive, that was okay to be offensive and so
It
on.
was just borderline, sometimes borderline offensive.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
now imagine if religion or any organization keep to that thing that we are just going to do what we do and things are going to change, but we don't care. They're eventually going to make themselves irrelevant in the life of humanity. So, and I think the Catholic Church has been struggling with that changes that are there and are necessary. And Pope Francis, in my opinion, did a good job in bringing this the group of people under their religion oversight that and the organization of the church. I think he did the best he could to bring them together. Now, as you know, the Pope is elected in something called conclave. What do you know about that?
So my understanding of how the Pope is elected is that there's cardinals, and the cardinals all group together and get bricked in, like locked into this room,
Hmm.
until they all come to a unanimous decision of which one is going to be the
Well,
next
it
Pope.
doesn't have to be unanimous, but it need to be a kind something like a super majority, and then literally they just voting. And as a matter of fact, they can vote for anybody. They
It
can
doesn't
act.
even have to be one of them.
No, it
So
doesn't.
okay,
As a matter of
interesting.
fact, I mean, I think it has to be a Catholic. I don't believe they can choose you or me
Well,
for
they
that.
can't choose me because I'm a woman, and that's actually one of my other
No,
questions.
yeah, it has to be a man, and but it has to be a Catholic. But I don't believe there is a
I
rule.
think there's one other rule: they can't be American.
I don't believe
I
so.
think that I learned in school that the Pope cannot be from the U.S. or living in the U.S. because that would be giving the U.S. too much power, considering how much power we already have.
Huh. I would look that up because I don't believe that is something written and so on. I would be extremely surprised if that was true. Now, in reality, it's always one of the cardinals that's going to be elected.
Yeah.
And it's really,
Oh yeah. Any baptized Roman Catholic male is technically eligible to be the Pope. However, the vast majority have been from the College of Cardinals.
yeah, yeah. So, but I don't believe that the US, being US or not
Yeah,
US,
that's what I learned in school.
maybe that's what I'm not sure about that. I would dispute that. So,
It says if the Catholic Church were also run by an American, the global dominance of the US would be overwhelming, pervasive and
but
overwhelming.
it doesn't say that it cannot be a US.
It just probably would not happen until the US falls apart.
Okay, that's a different podcast. So they get together, they vote, and there's lots of intrigues. And the reason they are enclosed, that's what called conclave, because they cannot leave there, they cannot communicate with the outside world, and because they have to come to a conclusion.
And it can take days, right?
It can take days or it can take weeks, but and that is why it is like you put lots of people who wouldn't agree on anything in one room and they cannot leave until like the way you deal with your children.
Yeah, okay. So I just have some random like human questions about that.
Mhm.
Is there a restroom in there?
Oh yeah, yeah, they have their own rooms and so on. There's like a big
Oh, okay.
building.
Someone explained it to me who works in this office, and they that person pretty much made me feel like I don't know, and I knew this wasn't true, but that person made me feel like all the popes stand in a little circle, someone builds bricks around them and locks them in. And I was
No,
thinking
no,
like,
no, no, no.
what about the food? Like
No, see, as a matter of fact, there are special nuns that they are selected there. They cannot talk to the cardinals. Absolutely not.
but they cook for
Nobody
them,
can.
clean.
They cook, clean, and so on. The cardinals, they go to place, they vote. If the vote is not unanimous, then obviously the different smoke comes out, and then they burn everything, and if the vote is not, uh, I think super majority, they have to come back and vote as many times as they want, but they cannot leave, they cannot communicate with outside world and so on. They cannot even talk to staff and so on. And there are some people that run the show, but everybody who talks there is one of the cardinals.
Okay, and then so they can sit. I think this question is pretty obvious, but they can debate with each other. They can say like, no, it should be this pope because we should be moving in this direction.
I'm not sure about that. I think the thing is, all the talks happen outside of the voting thing. It's not like openly somebody talks. I'm sure there are some talks there, but it's not like a debate. There are lots of intrigues in the back rooms and so on. By the time they come to the vote, more important,
What do
more
you
or
mean
less,
when you say intrigues?
like somebody gets okay. With the you know Catholic Church, like any other political organization, has intri- fractions. Like Latin American are together, Africans are together, more progressives are
Section, yeah.
together, and more conservatives are together, and so on. And they make deal with each other. Okay, if you give us this, we give you that, and you vote
Yeah,
for our fraction,
that's what
and
I
so
was
on.
thinking because like couldn't a really rich person just pay? I mean, I don't think it would happen, but like for
Mm,
example, like Elon Musk. Let's say Elon Musk is
I don't believe.
he's Catholic, whatever. I don't know if he is or isn't.
Yeah,
He doesn't act like it, but let's say he is, and he just like paid all the cardinals. I will give you $10 million each if you vote me in.
I don't believe that at that level those cardinals are really motivated by $10 million.
I wouldn't think so either. But
Yeah, I don't believe that's the really at that point. I think truly at that level there are lots of people who believe in the cause,
I
and
think so.
they and in their way, even if their way maybe is not my way or somebody else's way, they believe they're working for the benefit and the advancement of the Catholic Church's cause. So, but either way, but there are lots of like fraction people. No two people believe the same thing, and this is a big deal for them. So they make deals and so on. They talk to each other about how the future should look like, and based on that, at the end of the day, once they have a super majority or something like that, then I think then they burn everything in that famous fireplace with a certain. I think it's the what is it? I think the black.
Don't ask
It's
me.
a black smoke. If the pope is elected, if the white smoke is not elected, and all of that has to happen in certain time period. Well, in no, in certain time period they have to get together and they get enclosed until they cannot stand it. They would vote anything because believe it or not, the Pope wasn't just the head of the state in Vatican. He used to be the head of the state in the entire world and later in the entire Catholic world. You cannot be without the head of state there because that's chaos.
Yeah.
So they could not leave until they have chosen. And all of that is designed to make it that more you go, it's more uncomfortable it is. And I have heard, I'm not sure if it's true, that they stay minimalistic. The food is not the best. And
Oh,
so
I
the
think that makes total sense.
accommodation is not the most comfortable. They want them to be uncomfortable, that only keep going as long as only necessary
Yeah.
to finish the job, because the head of the world in that was what it was cannot be empty. The
So
chair of the head of the world cannot be empty.
so my understanding of these current cardinals, how many cardinals can we have?
I don't know exact number. But I think they're in 150 to my best knowledge.
Because I know that there's 10 main cardinals that are up and running for the next pope.
Mhm.
And they're all
Yeah,
from all around the
look
world.
up how many cardinals are out there. Not typing.
It's too far away.
Yeah, these are obviously.
There's 252 cardinals in the Catholic Church. However, only 135 are eligible
Yeah,
to
what I
vote.
thought, about 100 to 150.
As cardinals are over 80 are not eligible to vote. That's awesome. I wish that we would make rules like that in the US.
That,
Not that you can't vote, but that you can't run
Yeah.
when you're over 80 for anything, period.
Yeah.
But anyway, my understanding of the cardinals is that the popes choose them.
Pope chooses usually, or there's a process, huge process, but the assignment comes at the end of the day from the Pope. Yes,
And then
correct.
Pope Francis, the pope who just passed, I think that he's chosen about 80% of these current cardinals, is what I heard.
I'm not sure about that, but obviously, by the time these cardinal become cardinal by nature, but the path they have to have it, they're not the youngest already.
No, this new one is, or the one who Filipino one who's kind of like up and running, the top guy. I don't know. I'm not into the whole. I'm not versed on it, but he's my vote.
Well, you're not even Catholic, so take your
I
vote out there.
am. I was raised Catholic.
You were raised Catholic.
I went to
Okay.
Catholic church.
Oh wow. Well, maybe you're Catholic, so maybe you can have. Well,
I
you
can
cannot.
anyway.
Oh, anyway.
Yeah. He's 67.
67.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now, to be a cardinal, you have to go through a long, long process. By the time you're a cardinal, you're already pretty old. So there are very few years left there. So I can imagine that there is a good amount of turnover in those positions. And I think it's what an interesting idea that don't let them to vote, because I knew that there are about 100 to 150 cardinals that vote, but I didn't know that I actually have more. The other one just cannot vote. So what a good idea.
That is a pretty progressive idea too, because I
Yeah.
think people over 80 would have such a different mindset than people who are like 65.
No, I think the reason for that is that those people, even if you lose your mental
You can
capacity,
still be in position.
you can still be in the position, and they don't want something of this gravity be decided that the question even about their mental capacity. I think that's a
Mhm.
very, very smart. Whoever did that thing rule is very smart.
I think so.
So yeah, but what we
And the
need.
Pope is the Pope until he passes away.
Correct, or resigns, because the last Pope Benedict,
He resigned, didn't he?
he resigned, and then that was, I think, one of the very few times actually that we had two Pope, a Pope Emeritus and the actual Pope, and that is was the actually the very few times that has happened.
Has there ever been a time, maybe there has in history that you don't know about, but has there ever been a time when we had to like evict a Pope?
Whew, yeah, they were actually okay. Yeah. You have to go far, far back. And there are few popes that they were pope just for a few days, and some people say they were evicted from life and so on, and so on. But there were actually some popes that they were. We are not sure about that. That they died under very strange circumstances. So, and there were some popes that actually armies fought against them, but then they didn't really kill them. They just damned their. You see, you know how Vatican is, right? Vatican is an extremely small place. Vatican is much smaller than any of the suburbs. No, Vatican is just few blocks of land.
Okay.
Do you ever think why? How comes that just these few blocks of land became Vatican? The, you have to know the history of Italy to understand that. You remember we talked about how Greek were big, and then the Roman were big, and then they fought and so on, and then eventually Roman Empire fell apart, right? And then it was this different kind of kingdom. The biggest one was actually French kingdom, which they became really, really big. And then British Empire became big. And then, but the British Empire in 1500, the damn uh, king um, wanted to divorce his wife, and Pope didn't want to permit them. So they made a whole new religion so he can divorce his son. So British Empire was gone, and they became stronger and stronger, and they moved. I mean, obviously, the whole thing started with the Martin Luther from Germany and so on, who was a rebel and so on. But either way, and then it was most of Southern Europe was Catholic, to Middle Europe. In Middle Europe, Upper Europe, most of them are still Catholic, and then you get to Scandinavia, they become more like a Protestant, and so. But in most of those areas, they were Catholic kingdom, like Portugal, Spain, and in today's Italy, it wasn't Italy. Italy is a very new country. They were this very small kingdom. One of those kingdom was actually Rome.
Okay.
It wasn't just few blocks. It was actually a big part and that was under um, practically dominance of Pope. Pope was running actually a country with one thing: all the other kings has to play allegiance to the Pope. Their legitimacy came after Pope says, "Okay, you're legitimate, you're legitimate, you are legitimate." Like right now, we know that in South America, what language do they speak?
South America,
Yeah.
Spanish and Portuguese.
Why? Why Spanish and Portuguese?
Portugal and Brazil and Spain and
But why?
because
So,
Portugal and Spain went there and conquered it.
and Portugal and Spain, they were fighting each other all along, but they're both Catholic until the Pope says, quit fighting. I am your boss.
And your brothers, enough is enough.
No, this is the line. From this line, everybody west speaks, it's yours, Spain. From this line, everybody east is yours, Portugal. Well, then Portugal went mostly to Africa and Brazil. That line, obviously, the line wasn't that great. They didn't have our knowledge. Everything west of that was to Spain, so they speak Spanish. Brazil speak Portuguese, and so on. So, and that could happen because Pope sat them down and say, "You get your legitimacy from me. I'm telling you, this is the line. You cannot. We have other enemies like English, British, Protestant. You cannot fight each other anymore."
Right. You
So,
need to stay strong.
and but he could do that because all the kingdom there, they got their legitimacy from Pope. But then the Pope start doing things that some of this kingdom didn't like, especially Kingdom of France, which got very strong. So, as a matter of fact, few times the French army, in a friendly thing, marched toward the Rome. They never officially fought it, but then they were came very
Like
close.
when you do this to your sibling, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you.
But I'm here, but I'm here.
Yeah.
So and now and then eventually that domain of the Pope got smaller, 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 and now it's just few blocks. And then the role of the Pope in the legitimacy of other kingdom became very nominal and then was removed. But there was something called the Holy Roman Empire. Interestingly, the Holy Roman Empire domain was mostly today's Germany,
Okay.
and those all those kingdom, they were, but the Pope has to give them their legitimacy to be the king, and the head of the Holy Roman Empire for a long time was first the Pope, and then was assigned to another person who was still getting legitimacy from the Pope, and we were talking about that, that practically, if any of the Pope was killed and so on, they weren't killed, but they were some of them came very close to that, and that is how Roman, the Vatican or Church lost a lot of influence and got smaller and smaller and smaller.
When I know you just like explained the whole thing, but when was the last time that they lost like a little bit of space?
Well, I think eventually this little kingdom in Italy, they came together and made the state of Italy under a kingdom.
Mhm.
That kingdom didn't last long, and then they became like a republic.
Or I guess I can rephrase
And then
my.
they had a treaty with Vatican. So Vatican is not just land in the Italy; it is actually a sovereign state. When you go from Italy, pass through those doors, you're entering a new state. They are not under jurisdiction of Italy. Obviously, they get help and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. They don't produce their own electricity.
yeah.
Okay,
What is
and they're
the
not,
bread?
yeah, they're not bread or water or anything and
Yeah.
so on. But they are not actually under jurisdiction. Is one funny thing is that um, all the guards in the Vatican are those Swiss guards. They have those really funny.
Oh my gosh, I
fingers.
just saw a photo. What a goof. They look like jesters.
But
And
but do you know why?
No, I need to know why.
Because you remember that some of those popes died under certain circumstances that weren't, and those all those intrigues. So how do you do that? Those bodyguards are not all the influence of the local government or local politician or local business people. You bring them from somewhere completely else.
That doesn't answer the
Swiss.
question of the weird
No.
outfit.
Well, the weird outfit is this Swiss outfit. They were the Swiss 16th and 17th century, um, um, uh, you know, uh, military outfits. I mean, military outfits at that time, you remember holding back on certain things and so on?
Yeah, but I'm just saying, Cassandra can overlay a photo of this.
Yeah.
But like,
They look like a.
are you kidding me?
Okay, imagine
You're
it
telling
is a
me like
time.
this is the guard? No, this is the person who comes to make the king laugh.
Now, imagine you're in a place that you need to understand who are your soldiers
Yeah, you make
and
them
who
obvious.
are other. You mean the redcoats? I mean, imagine today's
Yeah,
military.
I know, yeah.
The British redcoats would go there with the red coat. Hey, shoot at me! I, I'm here, right here,
It's
right
muggy.
here.
It's like muggy and gray. They're like, well, I have a red jacket.
Yeah, well, here I am.
Well,
You don't see
sweetie,
me. You don't see me. Here I am.
my-
No, and at that time, people would fight person to person. You want to
Yeah.
make sure you don't kill your own people. So how do you make sure they know exactly that you are not the enemy? You dress them like this, then there's no question.
And they
Nobody
wish
will
they-
mistake
They
them.
wish they were. They wish they were the enemy, so they didn't have to wear this outfit
Nah,
with
yeah,
the puffy pants and tight knee-high socks.
there is no way you can mistake them
But-
for enemy.
My question I was trying to ask is:
Mm.
in the future, do you think that the Pope, the Vatican, will have less power than they do now?
I don't predict
Like
the future. I
considering-
just don't know. I just don't know the answer to that. I just know that humanity is moving, and every institution who doesn't move with humanity um, eventually becomes irrelevant. And that is doesn't apply to a religion or a political. That applies to anything because, like, how much fun is for you to go and talk to somebody who talks like people used to talk 200 years ago? You don't understand half of the thing they say. Now, I'm not understanding was okay for a while because guess what? The Catholic Church used to have their sermon in Latin.
I know my sister still goes to Latin mass.
Well, they speak literally Latin. How many years do you think that they changed that rule? That was a big deal in their time. That instead of Latin, to talk to people in a language they understand. When do you think that happened?
I have no idea.
Not long ago.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
It
think
is
so.
not within your lifetime, but it is within my lifetime that they start talking a language that people actually understand what it means. So, and that is what I'm saying. I used to go actually to lots of different churches and so on, and I would look at even the kids, even though they would understand that you would see lots of bored faces there and so on. Now imagine you talk in a language that is just
Yeah, I know.
they don't.
When my sister goes to Latin mass, sometimes she takes my brothers, and they hate it.
Now, there are lots of that, but I have been as well in masses and sermons and so on that it's really moved me.
Oh, I've been to Southern Church, and it was so lively. When I
Mhm.
would go visit my grandma in the South, we would go to these churches, and they would have like washboards and stuff, and be like playing live music. Like,
Okay,
it's so
well, I
noisy,
think you
it's
and I
so-
have different criteria there. I'm talking about truly a talk that is relevant. That is, I'm talking about a sermon that really addresses the core of the humanity today. That what are we doing? What are like a message of love? That message of love that is mostly that's what I love the New Testament much more than Old Testament because Old Testament is about all the ways I can kill you
you know,
and or enslave you and so on and so all the rules I have to follow. But the New Testament is mostly about message of love,
mhm.
about what that really means to live that life. And but there are lots of things that today as well we see everywhere enemies. Okay, and yes, I mean you can have a sermon that really captures people and bring their attention still think about that when they go home. But you cannot do that if they don't understand the word you say. So
True.
I think that's all what you should capture for now.
Thank you guys for watching. This was Essence of History, and we talked about the Pope. I'm Amanda Armagost.
I'm Dr. Abbasi for Essence.
Have a good weekend.